When you think of pirates, the image that likely comes to mind is a flamboyant rogue in the Caribbean, cutlass in hand, pistol at the hip, and the black Jolly Roger fluttering overhead. This romantic vision, painted by books and movies, is a mix of truth and tall tale. In reality, the history of piracy in the Caribbean is far more complex, born from imperial rivalry, religious conflict, and a hunger for wealth. The age of Caribbean piracy was set in motion by the European discovery of the Americas in the late 1400s. Spanish explorers led the charge, establishing colonies across Central and South America. These colonies soon became vital cogs in a transatlantic system of wealth extraction. European goods flowed westward, while gold, silver, sugar, and tobacco traveled east. Ships heavy with riches became irresistible targets. By the mid-1500s, Spain had emerged as Europe's dominant superpower, largely thanks to this influx of American treasure. But power breeds enemies. France, England, and the Netherlands, rivals both politically and religiously, resented Spanish dominance. The Protestant Reformation had already fractured Europe, and now overseas ambitions deepened those divides. Rather than confront Spain directly in Europe, these rivals turned their attention to its colonies. Spanish ships, brimming with treasure, and lightly defended coastal settlements became prime targets. Early raids began with French privateers and state-sanctioned pirates who attacked with royal approval in exchange for a share of the loot.
Figures like Jean Fleury, François Leclerc, and Jacques Dessour carved paths of destruction across Spanish holdings in the New World, particularly along what became known as the Spanish Main. Coastal cities like Cartagena, Portobello, and Panama City, as well as island settlements like Havana and Santo Domingo. England soon followed suit. The late 16th century brought open war between England and Spain, ushering in English privateers such as Sir Francis Drake, Sir Richard Hawkins, and Sir Walter Raleigh. These men operated with a mix of patriotism and personal greed, raiding Spanish vessels and strongholds. But, lacking permanent bases in the region, these raids were often brief and sporadic. Spain, in turn, responded with heavily armed escorts for its treasure fleets, making attacks more perilous and less profitable. By the early 1600s, Spain still controlled most of the Caribbean, but French, English, and Dutch settlers were beginning to chip away at this monopoly. Around 1625, a handful of French hunters began living on the northwestern coast of Hispaniola. They survived by hunting wild game and smoking the meat on wooden frames, a method called boucanage. From this humble practice came the term buccaneer, originally just meat smokers, not pirates. But pressure from Spanish authorities soon pushed these settlers off Hispaniola and onto the nearby island of Tortuga. In 1629, the Spanish launched attacks on the joint English-French settlements of St. Kitts and Nevis. While some settlers returned afterward, many French chose instead to join the growing community on Tortuga. By 1630, these displaced settlers began to embrace piracy in earnest. With limited natural resources and a thirst for revenge against the Spanish, the buccaneers turned to attacking ships bound for Europe specifically, treasure-laden Spanish vessels. Despite Spanish efforts to remove them, the pirates kept coming back, stronger and more numerous each time. In 1640, French engineer Jean de Vasseur arrived on Tortuga and built Fort de Rocher, overlooking the harbor. This cannon-laden fortress provided safe harbor for pirates from all nations in exchange for a share of their loot. With this, Tortuga became the Caribbean's first true pirate port. The buccaneers, now calling themselves the Brethren of the Coast, formed loose coalitions. Before each raid, they elected a captain and agreed upon articles, codes of conduct that governed behavior, outlined punishments, and set terms for sharing treasure. Surprisingly democratic, these articles allowed crews to depose unfit leaders and guaranteed shares based on rank and role. Captains received the largest portions, followed by surgeons, carpenters, and finally, the crew. Punishments ranged from fines to lashes, and for serious offenses like desertion or betrayal, marooning, or execution. It was a rough justice, but by the standards of the day, it offered structure and even fairness. By 1654, Spain had had enough. A full-scale invasion of Tortuga followed, and after a 9-day siege, the buccaneers were forced to surrender. The Spanish demolished the fort to prevent any future pirate use. Yet, the pirates returned again, and by 1660, Tortuga had fallen under French control.
A new fort, Fort Blondel, rose near the ruins of the old one. This shift coincided with England's capture of Jamaica in 1655, and over time, English pirates began using Port Royal as their base rather than Tortuga. Still, pirates of all stripes mixed and mingled at both ports. Letters of marque, legal licenses to plunder, were issued by governors in both Jamaica and Tortuga, blurring the line between pirate and privateer. One notable English privateer was Christopher Mings, who led several devastating raids against Spanish colonies. In 1663, Mings commanded the largest buccaneer fleet ever assembled and attacked San Francisco de Campeche. Among his fleet was a rising star, Henry Morgan. Morgan would go on to become one of history's most notorious pirates. His raids on Spanish ships and towns, including Portobello in 1668 and Panama in 1671, brought him immense wealth and, ironically, a knighthood from King Charles II. As more buccaneers joined the fray like John Coxon, Bartholomew Sharp, and John Sawkins, their operations grew bolder. One of the most legendary exploits was the 1680 Pacific Adventure, in which pirates crossed the treacherous Darien Gap, allied with native tribes, seized Spanish ships, and sailed back via Cape Horn. This period saw Port Royal flourish. By 1692, it was a bustling town of over 6,000 people, pirates, merchants, artisans, and tavern keepers alike. A contemporary observer noted that pirates could spend thousands of pieces of eight in a single night. Port Royal earned a reputation as the wickedest city on earth. But on June 7, 1692, fate intervened. A massive earthquake struck Port Royal, sinking much of it into the sea. Although rebuilding efforts were made, the town never fully recovered. Even before the quake, Port Royal had begun shifting away from piracy toward sugar plantations and the slave trade. New laws cracked down on piracy. The pirate utopia was fading, soon to be replaced by the gallows. Still, the story was far from over.
With the Caribbean seas glittering with treasure ships and vulnerable colonies, it was only a matter of time before pirates made their mark not just as outlaws, but as the founders of a rebellious world all their own. By the 1660s, Tortuga had transformed into a haven for buccaneers. Originally settled by French and English outcasts, it grew into a pirate stronghold with the construction of Fort Blondel. Here, pirates of all backgrounds gathered under a shared banner of opportunity, revenge, and wealth. Codes of conduct were drawn, captains were elected, and the loot was split according to rank and role. In an age of monarchs and strict hierarchies, pirate ships were some of the most egalitarian institutions afloat. Meanwhile, across the sea, Port Royal in Jamaica was flourishing. Captured by England from the Spanish in 1655, it quickly became the beating heart of Caribbean privateering. The English governors handed out letters of marque, legal licenses to plunder enemy ships, and pirates responded with brutal efficiency. Christopher Mings led raids of unprecedented scale. In 1663, he commanded the largest pirate fleet ever assembled to attack San Francisco de Campeche. His companion, Henry Morgan, would rise to infamy with audacious assaults on Spanish cities, including Portobello, Maracaibo, and Panama. Morgan's success brought him not punishment, but praise. He was knighted and appointed lieutenant governor of Jamaica. Other notable pirates like John Coxon, Bartholomew Sharp, and John Sawkins pushed boundaries even further. In the 1680 Pacific Adventure, they crossed the unforgiving Darien Gap, joined with native allies, and launched devastating raids on Spanish Pacific settlements before returning around Cape Horn. Their actions shook empires. Port Royal swelled with prosperity. By 1692, it boasted over 6,000 residents and was known as the wickedest city on earth. Pirates freely spent their plunder on wine, women, and entertainment. It was a playground for those who lived fast and feared nothing. But then came disaster. On June 7, 1692, a massive earthquake struck. Much of Port Royal was swallowed by the sea. The thriving pirate capital was never the same. Even before the catastrophe, England had begun to shift away from piracy, focusing instead on sugar plantations and the slave trade. Anti-piracy laws followed, and the buccaneers began to vanish. Still, some pirates refused to give in. In the early 1700s, many regrouped in Nassau in the Bahamas. Poorly defended and far from European control, Nassau became the new epicenter of piracy. With no formal government, the pirates established what became known as the Pirate Republic, a loose confederation of pirate crews governed by shared codes, mutual protection, and a spirit of defiance.
This republic attracted outlaws from across the Atlantic world. Former privateers, escaped slaves, unemployed sailors, and adventurers. It's estimated that between 1715 and 1725, nearly 5,000 pirates roamed the Caribbean, and nearly a third were of African descent. Life aboard pirate ships was harsh, but it offered freedom, equality, and the chance to escape the rigid structures of life on land. The Pirate Republic produced legendary figures: Benjamin Hornigold, Henry Jennings, Charles Vane, Calico Jack Rackham, Mary Read, Anne Bonny, Blackbeard, names still whispered today. They raided with impunity, ignoring nationality, flag, or law. No longer content to harass just the Spanish, they attacked British, Dutch, and French ships alike. The Golden Age of Piracy had reached its peak and its breaking point. In 1717, King George I issued a proclamation. Pirates who surrendered would receive a royal pardon. Few accepted. So in 1718, he sent Woodes Rogers to Nassau as the new royal governor. Rogers arrived with warships, blockaded the harbor, and broke the pirate stronghold. Many fled. Some, like Charles Vane, tried to resist. Others, like Hornigold, switched sides and became pirate hunters. Gradually, the Pirate Republic collapsed. Vane was captured and hanged in 1721. Calico Jack met the same fate in 1720. Blackbeard fell in a bloody battle with a Royal Navy crew in 1718. One by one, the leaders were executed, often their bodies left to rot in cages as warnings to others. By 1726, the Golden Age was over. The Royal Navy patrolled the seas. Laws were enforced. Pirate havens were shut down or turned into colonial ports. Some pirates faded into obscurity. Others sought work in navies, plantations, or logging camps. The wild, rebellious freedom of pirate life was gone. But the legend lived on. Despite the violence, piracy offered something rare: equality, democracy, and brotherhood. Crews shared profits, elected leaders, and lived outside the rules of the empire. Many pirate ships were more just than the societies that condemned them. Much of what we think we know, talking parrots, walking the plank, or buried treasure, is fiction. Yet the spirit behind it, the boldness, the camaraderie, the rebellion, was very real. The pirates of the Caribbean were not just criminals. They were symbols of resistance, of daring to defy the world as it was and imagining something different. From Tortuga to Port Royal, from Nassau to the high seas, they carved their place in history